All right, hold on. Holding by the Book of Leviticus chapter 18. Again, one welcome on. Holding by Book of Leviticus chapter 18. And we are in verse 4. Again, one welcome. Holding by Book of Leviticus chapter 18, verse 4. And the Torah says, it's Mishpatai, Tasu v'es ukosai, Tishmaru laletes behem ani Hashem Elokech. So here the Torah says that you shall do my judgments, right? Things that make sense, keep my ordinances, things don't make sense, and to walk therein, to go in their, go in their ways, let's say, because I am the eternal your God. So first thing we mentioned last week that Rashi says that first of all, doing my judgments means things that I understand, that go according to human feeling of justice, right? In other words, even if they weren't mentioned, it was worthwhile certainly to mention them, right? Even things that are obvious, right? The Torah does tell us things, don't steal, don't kill, etc. Things that make sense, things that are obvious. The Torah doesn't have to mention things that are obvious, but it does anyway. I mean, many things obviously not obvious as well. Then it says, keep my ordinances, matters which are decrees of the king, right? Where, against the evil inclination is going to raise objections. Why should we observe them? They don't make any sense, right? And against the nations of the world, they're going to raise objections, right? I.e., why can't you eat pig? Why about wearing clothes a mixture of wool and linen? Shatnez, water mingled with the ashes of the red heifer, different things, because God said, I'm the Lord your God, this is what you have to do. So we spoke about whether we care what the nations say or we don't care. And walking in their ways, free yourself from their environments. And a person shouldn't say, acquire Jewish wisdom, now I'm going to acquire other wisdom. So we spoke actually quite a bit about that last week. And we mentioned also the Ibn Ezra, that the Ibn Ezra said, I'm the Lord your God, right? If I keep what I'm supposed to do, then I will be your God, right? As if to say, if you don't keep it, I'm not your God, right? So we spoke about that. Then we spoke about that. As well. At the same time, we're going to see the Ramban, right? The Ramban over here says like this. The Ramban says, brings down Rashi, right? First thing he does is he brings down Rashi over here. And he said, even if these things that are obvious didn't need to be said, we said them anyway. It was still worthwhile to say them. And again, about stealing, immorality, and other things. So it brings down Rashi over here. And then the Medrash talks about specific things, like even if he didn't write it, right? Even if the Torah didn't write it, should have wrote it anyway. Still worthwhile, right? As Rashi says, he gives an example, right? Yeah, stealing, immorality, idolatry, murder, cursing with God's name. So here comes on the Ramban, and the Ramban says, what does it mean, mishpat? Mishpat, normally we understand things that make sense, right? A chok is a law that doesn't make sense, right? Won't make sense, again, like mixing wool and linen, shatnez, or, not eating pig, right? Also, why shouldn't you be allowed to eat pig? In general, the red heifer, right? Those are things that don't make sense. Mishpat says the Ramban, right? What do I understand by mishpat? As we said, As we said, things that make sense. And these are like laws brought in Parshas Mishpatim, and the entire Torah, right? Parshas Mishpatim in the book of Exodus, probably I think one of the biggest parshas that most mitzvahs. I think one of the most mitzvahs in that parsha. It's all about laws of damages, right? Seemingly, a lot about the laws of damages there. So here the Ramban says the laws that are said in Parshas Mishpatim, right? In the entire Torah, things that make sense, right? Things you need, so to speak. And then it says, it's going to say in the next verse, right? We're not going to get there today, but it says in the next verse, you should keep them at the end of the verse, Ani Hashem, and live by them. Now, what does it mean to live by them? So we're going to speak about that in the next verse. But he says over here, right, already forewarning, but he says, I'm going to tell you, you got to keep these commandments, so you should live by them. Now, what does that mean? What does that mean? These laws that I understand, what does it mean to live by them? So he says, because these laws are for the sake of man, in order that's going to bring peace to where they live. They're basic laws, right? So imagine you have a country, state, place wherever you live, you have a place where you don't have basic laws. What would happen? Chaos, right? Even worse chaos than there is today. Moshe Feinstein, a blessed memory, one of the Torah giants in America of the last generation. Would have been Torah giant if lived in Israel or anywhere else. So he says, I think it's in Parshas Mishpatim, I think he brings down there in his commentary on the Torah called Drash Moshe. And he says, what's the difference between laws that are given the Jewish people and universal laws? What's the difference? So he says, laws for the Jewish people, what we're supposed to eat, not eat, this, that, it's supposed to elevate the soul, right? It's supposed to draw close to God. Now, those are what these laws are. Whether we understand them more, we understand them less, doesn't matter, right? That's what the laws are there for. What about everyday laws? Everyday laws are there so that man doesn't destroy each other, right? Man doesn't eat each other up alive. Because if you didn't have those basic laws, what's going to happen? Chaos. People do whatever they want. They'll steal. They'll murder. They'll do other things. They got laws on the books, basic laws. So Ramoshe Feinstein, which just flexes out, Ramoshe Feinstein says the difference is our laws are for the sake of elevating the soul, to draw us close to God, to help us fulfill potential, as we always say. Right? And the laws for non-Jews are what? To keep order. Because if you didn't have these laws, right, the whole world goes to pot. Wherever you live goes to pot. People kill, people steal, people do other things. Yeah, so it comes on the Ramban. And the Ramban says, it says you should live by these laws. We're going to see what he means. These laws are what? To give a person life and peace. That a person shouldn't damage his friend. Or, God forbid, kill him. Right? That would make sense. In other words, law and order. You need these laws, i.e. mishpati. Basic laws are not causing damage to others, right? Those are, a lot of these laws. And the laws that make sense, as we said before. So he's telling you, why do you have them? You have them because you shouldn't cause someone else damage. You should not kill them. Right? Comes along Yechezkel Navi, comes along Ezekiel the prophet, and he says, chapter 2, mentions also, in chapter 20, that he mentions many times What does the prophet Yechezkel say? He says many times by mishpatim, by these laws that make sense. He says you should do them, right? We'll just quote it here. You should do them, right? 100% you shall do them. And in other words, a person should do them and live by them. In other words, the purpose of doing the mitzvahs is to live by them. It says by Shabbos, over there, chapter 20, verse 12, in the book of Ezekiel, it'll be a sign between me and you, i.e., between God and the Jewish people. Right? Now, let's make no mistake. A non-Jew wants to convert, very good. Can they keep Shabbos? They can keep Shabbos. Can they keep it exactly like a Jew? No. Why can't they keep it like a Jew? Because the sign between God and the Jewish people. Prophet Yechezkel says it says it in the Torah itself explicitly. There are three signs between God and the Jewish people. What are they? One of them is the law of the Sabbath, is Shabbos. What's the second thing? Bris milah, circumcision. Right? What's the third thing? Tefillin, phylacteries, whatever you want to call them. Non-Jews have an obligation in tefillin? No. They have an obligation in circumcision? No. Right? It distinguishes between God and the Jewish people. Now, what if a non-Jew wants to do it because it's good against cancer? Okay. Right? Always difference of opinion between doctors, every number of years. It's good to take off the foreskin because it's good against cancer. Not good against cancer. They always have this discussion, right? No part of the body, as we mentioned before, is superfluous, right? Except foreskin, right? Foreskin, what's the obligation? Take it off. That is the purpose for a Jew to take it off. That's one of the things it represents, not really the point, right? But the idea is to take it off. Now, we mentioned before, the appendix, doctors for a long time didn't know exactly what the appendix was for. They just, recently over the last, 10, 15, 20 years, something like that, come up with explanations what the appendix is for. But in general, the appendix ruptures. What do? You take it out, right? It's a danger, right? So you have to take it out. But, for years, they weren't sure what it was for. They were, they didn't have any conclusive evidence necessarily, what it was for, but obviously there's no part of the body that's superfluous, especially on the inside, right? Or on the outside. Right? Except this piece. Right? Except this piece of skin. So again, you can tell me, doctors will say sometimes, take it off. Why? Because it's good against prostate cancer. Okay. Then others will say, no, it's not true. This, that. It's certainly not conclusive. Right? But according to everybody, the whole purpose of it, at least according to the Torah, is you take it off. Very good. So a non-Jew who wants to keep Shabbos, who wants to convert, you keep Shabbos. Very good. But you got to do something, obviously, on purpose, to break it. Because the Gemara says, non-Jew keep Shabbos, liable for death penalty. Right? So again, it's a sign between God and the Jewish people. Right? Now, people will make the mistake, just flush this out a little bit, people will make the mistake and will say, God gave Shabbos to the entire world. Come on, don't you know how to read? It says in Genesis chapter 2, right? God created Shabbos, very good. Finished creating, God rested. You have Shabbos, very good. To say who God gave it to? No, it just says he created it. Come next to chapter 20. God comes in front of 600,000 men between the ages of 20 and 60, not including women and children. So he's talking about 3 million people. And what does God say? To the Jewish people, God says, he makes them a nation, right? And he tells them 10 commandments. What's one of the 10 commandments? Shabbos. Yeah, so it's given on Mount Sinai. So where does a non-Jew come off and say, it's mine? I can, I'm not saying they can't necessarily participate in certain things they might be able to do, but to keep it like a Jew, absolutely not. Right? I've heard these quote unquote, super Noahites, wink, wink. Some people say we can't keep Shabbos. Yeah, that's exactly what we say. You can't keep Shabbos, right? Not like a Jew. You want to participate in certain things, okay, within reason. Right? But if a non-Jew is going to say, I'm not going to use electricity on Shabbos. I'm not going to write on Shabbos. If they're not going to convert, yeah, They're not going to write. They're not going to do these other things. Very good. Death penalty. That doesn't apply to them. Totally doesn't apply to them. Oh, but we can keep Shabbos. Wink, wink. What do you mean? It's a sign between God and the Jewish people. Now, first, the process of conversion is a different issue. Different issue. But they have to do something on purpose. They have to do something on purpose in order to break it. So that is what the prophet Ezekiel says, right? He mentions many times, you got to keep the Torah, you got to keep these mitzvahs, you got to keep these mitzvahs that make sense. In order that what? You should live by them. We're going to see what that means. What does it mean to live by them? And you got the prophet Nehemiah. Prophet Nehemiah, chapter 9, verse 29, and he says, these laws, right, these laws that make sense, right, a person sinned, you should have to keep them. Why do you have to keep them? So you can live by them. They're laws you got to live by. So he says, we got it in the Torah itself, right? Torah says, we're going to see it actually in the next verse, but he says, by the laws of Mishpatim, right? Things, again, that make rational sense, you got to keep it, and you have to live by them. Yeah? So he says, as a proof, I got proof in the prophets, I got proof by Ezekiel, I got proof by Nehemiah. Yeah, same thing. Right? Same exact thing. You got to keep it, you got to live by it. Now, live by them. Now, what does that mean? Comes on the Ramban further. And the Ramban says, I got a Gemara in Yuma, 85b. Anyone wants to look it up? What does the Torah say? The Torah says, I'm going to see it in the next verse. Right at the end of the next verse, it says, Yaseh oisam, keep them, keep the mitzvahs. Yeah, sorry. Yaseh oisam adam v'chai behem ani Hashem. Man should keep these mitzvahs, i.e., he's talking to Jewish people. Yeah, even non-Jews mitzvahs that are rational according to the Torah. Non-Jews have to keep as well. But it says to live by them. To live by them, I am the Lord your God. Very good. Right? To live by them. Now, what does that mean? What does it mean to live by them? So, simple explanation. Somebody will tell me is if these are going to make you who you need to become. These are going to help you reach your potential. You got to keep these mitzvahs, right? These mitzvahs that make sense. Right? Even non-Jews have to keep these mitzvahs that make sense according to the Torah, right? Those are universal laws. So these are universal laws, right? Don't steal, don't kill. These are universal laws. Don't commit adultery, etc. But what's the purpose? So the Torah says, live by them. Yeah, live by them. So we just said before, living by them is to elevate the soul, right? Not just to keep order, right? It's for non-Jews, not, to keep order. Very good. You need order. You need order for Jews also. Okay. But what's the purpose of living by them? So you tell me, elevate the soul. We already said that. Very good. Right? Comes on the Gemara in Yuma, the end of Tractate Yuma, 85b. What does it say? How do the rabbis learn? It says, v'chai behem, you shall live by them. And it says, shelo yamuz behem, so you should not die by them. Oh, what does it mean? So what does it mean over here? Right? So here, the Gemara says, to live by them means you shouldn't die by them. What is that teaching you? It's coming to teach you. He says that pikuach nefesh, saving a life, is doicha as a Shabbos, bar mitzvahs. In other words, I have a life-threatening situation. It happens to be on Shabbos, because hey, we can't break Shabbos, right? Not allowed to break Shabbos. Shabbos, very holy day, right? Comes on the Gemara and says, pikuach nefesh, saving a life. Right, that pushes off Shabbos. Literally, doicha as a Shabbos means you're pushing it off. In other words, it supersedes Shabbos. Normally, Shabbos supersedes other things. Yeah, in other words, that'd be forbidden. Right, it'd be totally forbidden to do, things on Shabbos. Where do we learn it out from? From the Mishkan, from the tabernacle. We have smuchim. We have verses. One verse next to the next to, let's say, next verse. So they're all intertwined. So obviously, you have one verse talking about one thing, and you got the next verse. You can learn something from, you learn something from that, from these juxtaposition of verses, right? So we'll give an example by Shabbos. So in the book of Exodus, towards the end of the book of Exodus, what does it do? Chapter after chapter, building tabernacle, building the Mishkan. Yeah, the loops, the bars, the altars, all kinds of things to build. And then in chapter 37, Parshas Vayakil, beginning of Parshas Vayakil, it says keep Shabbos. Markesher. Rashi asks the question, what's going on? What's the connection? We have verses, many verses, hundreds of verses before, just before talking about building the tabernacle. Yeah. All the loops, the bars, the clasps, building it, and how big and how far, and this, and where you make it from. Very good. Then it says you got to keep Shabbos. Well, here in Exodus chapter 37. In Exodus chapter 20, it tells me I have to keep Shabbos. In Exodus chapter 19, it tells me I have to keep Shabbos. In other places, it tells me to keep Shabbos. I already know that. So what's the connection? So Rashi and others say, I got juxtaposition of verses. So therefore, since we're talking about all these verses about building the Mishkan, about building the tabernacle, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, God says, I want you to keep Shabbos, my kesher. What's the connection? And what's the answer? Because anything that you did in the Mishkan, anything you did in the tabernacle does not supersede Shabbos. Meaning, if there were things that were done exactly the way it was done in the tabernacle, it's forbidden to do on Shabbos. Those are the Torah prohibitions. Those are all the Torah prohibitions, those 39 categories. Torah prohibitions, right? Don't write, don't carry, don't cook, don't take the bad from the good. I mean, many things on these 39 categories. But why do we have hundreds and hundreds of laws of Shabbos, not just 39? Right? Because what the rabbis come along and do, the rabbi said, anything similar to these Torah prohibitions, we are going to forbid on Shabbos. Why? Because a person may come to do a worse prohibition, i.e. a Torah prohibition, meaning I have 39 categories. Underneath those categories are subcategories. So therefore, anything that was done exactly the way it was done in the tabernacle, very good. That's Torah prohibition. And anything similar to that is a rabbinic prohibition. Because the rabbis came along and said, we don't want you to come to a Torah prohibition. Now, what's the obvious question people ask? Because the obvious question is they're adding to the Torah. How the rabbis come along and add to the Torah, right? The Torah says very clear. The Torah says you can add and subtract, right? You're not allowed to add and subtract. Very good. Adding and subtracting literally means if I added an extra compartment in my tefillin, that's adding. If I take one out, that is subtracting, or with tzitzis. If I make a fence around the Torah, now someone will say, oh, this is just semantics. More than semantics. Why? Because if you make a fence around the Torah, what does that mean? That means you're guarding the Torah so people don't come to worse prohibitions. That's not adding to the Torah. You'll say, come on, there are multiple laws in all these categories, hundreds of laws, thousands of laws. Where you're allowed to do, not allowed to do on Shabbos. And only 3 are mentioned in the Torah itself, right? You're not allowed to carry, that's one of them. You're not allowed to cook, that's the second one, right? So there are 3 things. And you're not allowed to cook, right? You're not allowed to cook, you're not allowed to carry. I'll think of the third thing in a second. But there are 3 things Torah mentions. So I came up with 39. 39 come from different things done in the tabernacle. Because these were done, I have a juxtaposition of verses. What do I learn out? There's a connection, right? What is the connection? The connection is that doing things in the tabernacle do not supersede Shabbos, meaning it's forbidden on Shabbos, right? So those are Torah prohibitions. As we said before, in a rabbinic, anything else is going to be rabbinic. Right? Anything similar. Now, why did they come and do that? To make sure a person will not come to a worse prohibition. Right now, if you're busy doing all these things and then you forget, whatever, take away enjoyment from Shabbos as well. That's again, this is something that gets misquoted all the time. People say that's adding and subtracting to the Torah, right? That many people say wrongly. Yeah, I'm going to keep saying the same thing over and over again. I'm only going to keep biblical law. Okay, so be a Karaite. Yeah, so you can be a Karaite. They don't believe in what the rabbis say. Very good. Yeah, so they're going to keep what the Torah says. But they also, interesting enough, Karaites themselves, Karaites have tefillin. How do they have tefillin? How do they have tefillin? It says put frontlets between your eyes. Rabbis tell you that is tefillin, right? Put a sign on your arm, frontlets between your eyes. What's a frontlet? Right? That's the way it's translated, but we call it in Hebrew, it's not really a Hebrew word, right? But the word for frontlets that they translate, the word is totafot. The word totafot, Rashi, others bring down, is not a Hebrew word. It's not a Hebrew word. It's I don't know, some sort of African word, whatever it is. It's not a Hebrew word. If they don't believe in oral law, and they're not going to listen to the rabbis how they wear tefillin. They say, well, they have their rabbis, right? Their rabbis tell, they'll tell them what to do. Okay. But again, the rabbis put in vowels, right? It's kind of funny by the Messianics. We'll say we're never going to listen to the rabbis. We don't have to listen to the rabbis for anything. Okay. Everyone knows, or if you don't know, you'll know now that a Torah scroll, right? If you look at a Torah scroll, bona fide Torah scroll, a Torah scroll does not have vowels. Yeah. If it doesn't have vowels. So if the Torah scroll doesn't have vowels, I know how to read it. Right? It says, do not, so I'll give one example. One example, the Torah says, do not cook a calf in its mother's chet lamed beis. What is chet lamed beis? Could be chalav, could be milk, could be chalev. Means don't cook it in its fat, right? Then you wouldn't be able to eat anything fried, right? There goes, any fried food anybody wants to eat, yeah? But so how do you know what it is? How do they know what it is? Well, the rabbis tell you it has to be milk, right? It says it 3 times. Can't cook a calf in its mother's milk. Very good, right? So I'll tell people, listen, if you want to say that I pick and choose what the rabbis say, okay, I'll cut you a little bit of slack, drop of slack, right? The reason is because at least you're being honest, right? You pick and choose. But if you're gonna say, right, if a person's gonna say, I never listen to the rabbis, we never, okay, that's a lie, right? Because even their version, their what do you call it? Their translation, i.e. King James himself, is based on the Masoretic text. The Masoretic text has vowels, right? So I had a few people, trolling me. So if obviously if you're doing good things, then you get people to troll you. But in the end, they were steadfast and saying, we don't listen to anything the rabbis say. I said, okay, so where do you get your translation from? The rabbis put in the vowels. Yeah, check, mate. So whatever. They ended up backtracking and said, okay, most things we don't like what the rabbis say. Oh, that's different. If you want to say I pick and choose what the rabbis say, okay. I'll cut you a lot of slack, a tremendous amount of slack. If you're going to tell me we never listen to the rabbis, it's not true. Right? It's definitely not true. So here the Torah says, or the Gemara says like this. The Gemara says, V'chai b'hem. What does it mean to live by the Torah? So you tell me, or to live by these laws. So I would have said, simple explanation is you're going to live by the laws because it make you a better person. It's going to draw you closer to God. Not only that, a minor reason could be, it's not so minor, but a minor reason could be because it's going to bring order to the world. You don't have people that steal, right? There'll be deterrents for people that, are going to steal and do other things, right? That'll bring order to the world, but that's not the only point, right? That's the difference between our laws and non-Jewish laws. Very good. Because for our laws to elevate the person, to elevate the soul, to draw close to God, very good. But I would have said, so you don't die by them, so you don't get eaten up alive by people around you. You get injured, they kill you. That's what people do. And we have laws on the books. Look how bad it is. Yeah? So comes along, the Gemara says, no. That's not what it means. It means to live by it, not die by it. What do you mean? What do you mean not die by it? How am I not going to die by these laws? I would have said, simple explanation, you're not going to die by it. Like we said, yeah, people will kill you. People will steal from you. Yeah, that you shouldn't keep these laws, you're going to end up dying from it. But what does that mean? That's not what it means. That's not what it means to tell you. Says the Ramban over here, to teach you, as the Gemara says, Pikuach nefesh doiches a Shabbos. Right? Saving a life pushes off the laws of Shabbos. Pushes off the laws of a festival. Meaning if someone is, deathly ill, you do whatever you can to try and save them. But you can't do certain things on Shabbos. There are certain things on Shabbos forbidden. It's how you allowed to do it. Because you got an obligation to save their life. Saving their life comes first. Yeah. You got an obligation to save their life. So therefore, pushes off the laws of Shabbos. Yeah, that's it. That's a case where the person is deathly ill or in a dangerous situation. What if a person's not in a dangerous situation? Yeah, so you don't necessarily have to desecrate Shabbos, right? You could, try and do things in a different way, try and get a non-Jew to do certain things, right? But again, if it's a dangerous situation, do whatever it takes, right? So I'll give one example. So where I used to live, that there was no hospital there. It's kind of amazing because you got thousands of people living there, a pretty high birth rate, but you don't have a hospital, whatever, in this area. So you got to go to Jerusalem. Jerusalem take you, I don't know, take half an hour, take you 40 minutes, less, if there's no traffic. So I had a lot of children. I had to go to the hospital on Shabbos. A few of them were actually born on Shabbos, not all of them. But by one of the births, I asked my Rebbe, what do I do? I could, there's you call an ambulance. They have an non-Jewish driver. They have an Arab driver, let's say. Right? It's better going with them. Call them and go if I have to go. Or, if I have a car, I just drive myself. Because, after multiple births, could come out pretty quick. Depending how far along, the person is. So basically said, you can do it either way, right? If you're worried you're not going to make it, so forget about, maybe it's safer to go in an ambulance, go in an ambulance, but there's no difference. Why? Because even today, even with the birth rate today, where, the mortality rate is very small compared to what it used to be. Yeah, so it's still a dangerous situation, right? That there's no question. Yeah, it's definitely a dangerous situation. So what do? So you gotta go. Like you have no choice. If you're worried, how long is it take the ambulance to get there? There's that, and you have a car, so you go. Right? You don't worry about it. The question is what you do with the car and turning it off and whatever. Okay. Yeah. But he said, you could take an Arab driver, but if you're worried you might give birth before that, then yeah, you go yourself. You don't have to worry over here. That's a dangerous situation. That 100% is a dangerous situation. So whatever you can do to mitigate Shabbos desecration, so you do things a different way than you normally would. Yeah, that's what you do if possible, right? Yeah, if possible. Now, what if it's impossible? Yeah. Get a midwife and a doula. Yeah, there have been horror stories that people had home births. I'm not going to say all home births. I heard a number of stories. Yeah, stories that I know about that didn't end well. Did not end well having a home birth. Right? There's what to be said for home birth. Okay. Yeah, but a midwife's not a doctor. That's for sure. Yeah, anything goes wrong or potentially goes wrong, you're in trouble. Yeah, yeah. They tell me this horror stories from hospitals. What's better? Let me ask you, what's better? Better to go to a hospital. That's just what you would do. Yeah. If you want to tell me there are horror stories there, where would you think there'd be more horror stories? There'd be more horror stories at home. Yeah. Some hospital policy, someone wants to say cause death. Okay. Yeah, but in a normal setting, if anything goes wrong, you're better off in a hospital. Regardless. You're better off in a hospital, regardless of what the policies are in general. You got to go to the hospital. You have to go to the hospital. Yeah, hospitals, yeah, are notorious for trying to kill people and this and that. Okay. That's true. But on the other hand, well, what's the better choice? What's the better choice? So conventional wisdom would say you go to the hospital. That's a better choice. No, most people will not give birth at home. Why not? So you can say they've been brainwashed. You can have qualified people, and more qualified doctors there, whatever. Okay, you can say that. You can say that. Yeah. Yeah. So, you can say, it's generations of people being brainwashed that, hospital's the worst place. But I would agree in some cases. I would definitely agree hospital's not the best place. Yeah. They used to have here in Israel, they used to have a hospital specifically for giving birth. Yeah, that's all they did. That's pretty much all they did. And then they sort of got used for something else. So, then they had to go to a regular hospital. So yeah, I would say some are better than others, in different things. But again, when a person want to take the risk, it's a risk. It's a big risk. Definitely a big risk. Is it worth the risk? Someone will say, yeah. Okay. And if nothing goes wrong and then they go to the hospital, good. Yeah, but the safest place, regardless, is the hospital. A person could catch other things, and it's not as sanitized as it should be. And okay, I'm not a huge fan. I'm not a huge fan of hospitals. In general, you do whatever you can not to be in the hospital if possible. Yeah, that's for sure. Depending on what it is. But at the same time, something like this, which is pikuach nefesh. I mean, it is life threatening. There's no question. So, regardless, that's the safest place to be. Definitely safer than being home. That's no question. Yeah. Again, can a person have a home birth? I'm not saying not. They could. They could have a home birth. Right? There are horror stories about that. You can tell me there are horror stories in our hospital. Okay. Right? There are people that have home birth. Okay. Yeah. I'm not saying you can't do it. I'm just saying you're playing with fire. Yeah, you're definitely playing with fire. Yeah, there's more of a chance, much more of a chance, something going wrong there than in the hospital, usually. Yeah, much greater chance. I'm not saying it happens, but it's a greater chance. So you don't take a risk. When it comes to pikuach nefesh, saving a life, and this is saving a life, because a woman is in danger, regardless of what the mortality rate is and how down it is and whatever, it's still relatively safe, so to speak, because most women give birth and nothing happens, right? Child doesn't die in general. I mean, in some cases, but mortality rate is way down, way down. Yeah. So it doesn't matter though, right? It doesn't matter if it's way down. It's considered pikuach nefesh, right? So you do it, you do whatever it takes. So, you backpack, beforehand. If you have to make a phone call, whatever, you already have a dial before. I mean, you do whatever you can not to desecrate Shabbos or desecrate in a less way, right? That's the obligation. That 100% is the obligation. Now, if you have no choice, that's great Shabbos. You do it. Yeah, not your kid. You do it, right? The adults should do it. I met someone told the story. Told the story. Somebody in the shul fainted. Yeah, so the rabbi in the synagogue called 911. It's on Shabbos. Yeah, and whatever, the police come, and the person was only It was only, what do you call it? Person only was dehydrated. Yeah, I mean, whatever. Dehydration can be serious also, but that's pretty much what it was. Some kid, some teenage kids. Oh, look, the rabbi's desecrating Shabbos. Well, it's better that the rabbi does it because they see that, like, it's an important thing. You don't have a kid do it, or someone underage or whatever. You do whatever it takes. You don't wait, right? You don't wait over here. Yeah. So a bunch of questions. Then let me just finish here. So the Gemara says you live by the Torah, you should die by the Torah. So I'll tell a story. This is when I was giving classes on the phone. I wasn't at that time I wasn't doing them online, and see, no one can see my face or any of my any of my expressions. So we're talking about Bora, about selection, about taking the bad from the good, on Shabbos. So someone had asked the question. What do you do? What do you do if you are choking on a chicken bone? Yeah. So I said, well, if you're choking on a chicken bone, I said, there's nothing to do. You're choking, you have to die. Yeah. So that was my comment. I waited 5 seconds, nobody said anything. I waited 10 seconds, nobody said anything. After about 25 seconds, I said, there's a mitzvah to live by the Torah, not die by it. Yeah, that's exactly what we're saying over here. Like, a person's choking on chicken bone, you do whatever you can to get it out, right? You save the person, you try and save the person's life. Yeah, that's great Shabbos, whatever it takes. Yeah, so I said, there's a mitzvah. I said, don't, just because I said it doesn't mean that's true over here. Because I made very clear afterwards, I said that, there's a mitzvah, as Gemara here says, to live by the Torah, not die by it. So someone called me afterwards, and so I asked them, so what'd you think? They said, we couldn't tell because they couldn't see the expression on my face. So they couldn't tell. I said, was he serious? They said, really? You have to die? So that's what they were thinking. And I quoted this Gemara. That Gemara said you got to live by it. But the Torah, so you got to live by it, meaning that you do whatever it takes to save a person's life. That supersedes the laws of Shabbos, right? Book of Leviticus Chapter. Saving a life pushes off the laws of Shabbos. That's one explanation. Second explanation, it brings down the Ramban here brings down a medrash. Brings down a medrash of Torah's Kahanim. What does it mean, v'chai that you should live by what the Torah says? V'chai means in the next word. In other words, you're going to get reward for keeping the Torah. You're going to get reward in the next world. Now, if you're going to tell me, maybe I'm going to get the reward in this world, how are you going to get reward in this world? In the end, you're going to die. Yeah? Everyone's going to die. So if everyone's going to die, where do you see you get reward in this world? So he says, if so, let's go back. It says, what does the verse tell me? Asher yasa oisa ha'adam. The person keeps this, i.e. the mitzvah. Right? Even things that don't make sense. Right? So you shall live by it. But you're going to die. Right? And we say, schar mitzvah b'hayal maleka. You don't get the reward for a mitzvah in this world unless you do it, with great joy, get some aspect of it. Or if a person, God forbid, really evil. So God will have to reward them for the mitzvahs that they do in this world. Very good. They'll have to reward them because they're not going to have a portion of the world to come. But he's telling, so a second explanation means to live by it means that you're going to get reward for keeping that, even laws you don't understand. You're going to get reward for keeping it where? In the next one. Right? In the next one. That is what the Ramban says. That's the second explanation. Yeah, let's go back to a couple questions here. Someone says, I heard from Rabbi Yaron's lecture, Totafot is the name of tefillin. Well, it means 4 compartments. That's what it means. In Coptic language, which is an African language, that's what it means. Right? It means 4. Right? Tot, tat, test means 4. In Coptic, whatever African language that is. It means 4. What does 4 represent? 4 compartments. That's what it represents. That's what Rashi says. Yeah, according to what Rashi says. Could it be the name of tefillin in general? It could be. I don't know. But that's what Rashi says. Yeah. Someone asks, okay, it's based on mikdash. Will we going to be totally full on earth? Spiritual dimension descend from the physical building. The different ways this could happen. Different ways this could happen. Torah could come totally from heaven, right? Totally from heaven. And if it's going to come from totally from heaven, I got a problem because it's brought down that the Messiah is one of the things he's supposed to do is build it. So how does it come down from heaven? Totally built. So one answer is won't be fully built. He's going to do something to fix it or add something to it. Whatever it is, won't be totally built. So we'll have a portion. It'll have a portion in that. But the question, that's one thing. Second thing is either it's going to come down from heaven, and he's going to do a few things to fix it up, to finish it, right? Or it's going to be built from scratch. Yeah, the question is nobody knows. Differences of opinion, right? Just like in the Messiah, how the Messiah is going to come and what's going to be the end of days, right? Or whatever it's going to be. A lot of different opinions. A lot of different opinions. Anybody know what the real opinion is? No. And for the most part, it doesn't matter. It doesn't affect our daily life at all. I know people, former Christians, very much into it. Very good. It's got no practical ramifications, right? I mean, there are a lot of different opinions. So, any opinion could be right. We don't know. So the question is, could it be built fully on earth? Could be. Again, it's one of the jobs the Messiah is supposed to do. That doesn't mean he physically builds it himself. You have other people helping him. Okay. There's also the Nefesh Chaim, famous student of the Vilna Gaon of Chaim of Volozhin, started the Volozhin Yeshiva more than 350 years ago, almost 400 years ago. And Chaim of Volozhin brings down his epic work, Nefesh Chaim, the soul of life, literally. Everyone only, most people would probably only learn the fourth gate, which is about the importance of learning Torah. The first three gates are very much steeped in Kabbalah. Very much steeped in Kabbalah, right? But at the very beginning, he talks about the power of our mitzvahs, how they can affect things in the spiritual world, right? And he was saying, one of the things he was saying is, there are things that mirror this world and the spiritual world. I.e., there was a temple, there was a Beis HaMikdash, there was a temple that was built here on this earth, got destroyed. There was also a temple in heaven. Right? Whatever that means, whatever its purpose is. Right? So even though Titus and others, destroyed the temple and this and that, did terrible things, had no effect in the spiritual world. Right? But there is a spiritual dimension of the temple in that world. Yeah, it was brought down according to Kabbalah. So, my Rebbe would say, never met anyone been in that world to come back, but that's what it says. Right? That's what it says. So we Jews have the ability to affect spiritual world. Yeah. And, the Nefesh Chaim brings down, mentioned this before, Nefesh Chaim brings down, repercussions for our actions. What's one of the things he says? By eating from the tree of knowledge. Ate from the tree of knowledge. What was the tree of knowledge? Tree of knowledge, he says, was all the spiritual worlds were part of that tree. We're inside that tree. Let's say each spiritual world getting strength, one from the other 10 spiritual worlds, right? 10 spheres, as it's called. Each one getting strength from the one above it. And where all the spiritual worlds getting its strength from, the Kisei Kavod, God's heavenly throne, whatever that means. Yeah. That's where all the strength is coming from. Now, that being said, Adam and Eve ate from the tree, chomp, 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 right? They ate from the tree, whatever it was. Nobody says it was an apple, but whatever the tree was, that put all the spiritual worlds in flow. In other words, every mitzvah we do, we're trying to bring the spiritual worlds back to where it was, right? You see, Noah, we'll give one example. Noah, what did he do after the flood? Built a vineyard, very good. Planted a vineyard, and he got plastered, very good. Now, Noah's the prophet, very hard to understand. I should say, he was so depressed, from what happened, the whole world got destroyed, etc. So, he made this vineyard and he drank because of it. It could be theory, yeah. But you go a little bit deeper. What is one of the things that the tree of knowledge was? Wasn't a tree per se. It was a grapevine. It was a grapevine. So what did he do? So he takes from the grapes, makes it into wine. And what is he trying to do? Right? Not just to get plastered. He's trying to fix up the sin of Adam Arishon. He's trying to fix up the sin that Adam did. Right? There are people, later generations trying to fix up certain things, right, etc. But obviously he failed. Right? Obviously he failed to get drunk and whatever. So you see, the unbelievable ramifications of one act. Right? God said, that is not a Jewish concept, but God had to go to plan B. Now, doesn't God know past, present, future? God knows past, present, future. Very good. He knows man was going to sin. Okay, but he still gave him free will. He still gave him free choice. What happened? He blew it. So then God has to throw him out of the Garden of Eden, right? He has to put these fiery angels, these big swords by the tree of life. Why? Because he doesn't want to eat from the tree of life. Because if man eats from the tree of life, bang, gonna live forever. Can't live forever. Gotta die. You have to go in the ground. That's part of atonement, not full atonement, right? But that's part of atonement. Very good. So what does God say? Throw him out. Throws out Adam out of the Garden of Eden, right? Nobody knows what the Garden of Eden is. Today there's a physical Garden of Eden, there's a spiritual Garden of Eden. Nobody really, knows this world where it is. Very good. But even if you get close, even if you knew where it was, got these fiery angels, you're not going near the tree of life, right? Right? But anyway, God understood. But one action, people say, who cares? I'm an infinitesimally small speck of cosmic dust. Yeah, live in a town, in a city, in a state, in a country, a continent, on a planet, getting smaller. Right? We're a small speck of dust in the universe. Think about what does my action matter? Right? This is what the Nefesh Chaim says at the beginning. Person thinks the action doesn't matter. Oh, this matters. This action matters. It's brought down. I think it's a medrash that says when a person dies, who's the first person they're going to see? They're going to see Adam Arishon. They're going to see him and say, because of you, I have to go through death. It's all your fault. And he has to nod. And he says, yes. That's part of his atonement forever. Right? So everybody dies. Yeah, so they're brought down somewhere. Right? So they're brought down somewhere. So there are repercussions for your actions. Right? Again, a person will say, well, what does it matter what I do? I mean, of course. If you know something's going to affect someone else, something direct, what you do has an effect on what you do has an effect on someone else. But a person may say, what's the matter? I'm not hurting anyone. Doing something in the privacy of my own home. Who cares? I'm not affecting anyone. Yeah, maybe the only one you're affecting is yourself. Maybe you're affecting other people around you. Or maybe you're not even affecting anybody. Let's say. Doesn't matter. God says it's still not good for you, and it's going to be payback. Okay, even with all that, what's the point? What's the point? The point is that a person may think what I do doesn't matter. My actions are relevant, in the bigger scheme of things. So we think we're God's gift to the world. We're the greatest of creation. Very good, because we're creator last. Yeah. So if we do what we're supposed to do, yeah, in God's eyes, then we're the greatest of creation. If we don't do what we're supposed to do, then we're no better than animals, and animals are created before man. Right? So it depends. It depends what man does in this world. Okay. Now, that being said, a person could make a serious mistake, and say, in the bigger scheme of things, man definitely thinks he's the ultimate, right? Big egos or egos, as we say here in Israel, right? They think they're the ultimate. We are the ultimate. But think about the universe in general. Think about the planets. Yeah, think about how far away we are. Think about how much, no control we have on so many things. So many things we have no control. And you have people with big egos thinking they're God's gift to the world. They can't even control their own body, right? They can't even, control a bowel movement, right? How much control do we have over here? You say we put people on the moon, invented all these great things and technology and all. That's great. But in the bigger scheme of things, whatever we know, a drop in the bucket to what's out there. Yeah, no offense to science and medicine. There are a million things they don't know. Many things they don't know. They're discovering. They're discovering over time. Why? Because God wants to come out whenever he wants to come out. Yeah, but we are very advanced today. There's no question. But there are plenty of things they don't know. Plenty of things. And that doesn't make them humble either. It's kind of amazing. In a certain way. That I think the Maharal, I think, that says it's forbidden to study astronomy. Why? Because most people study astronomy and don't see God's greatness in the world, right? They're going to be heretics. So better not to study it, right? Better not to study it because majority of people study it, they become heretics. Yeah. Because hey, I won't become a heretic. I want to study the greatness. Okay, whatever. But he was talking in general. Right? The fact is, the person sees greatness on a daily basis. They don't acknowledge it. The Gemara Kedushin says, "Tov sheberoifim legehenim." The best of doctors go to hell. What do you mean the best of doctors? Why did you say doctors go to hell? Why? Why even the best of doctors? Because they see miracles on a daily basis. Anyone seen a child born? Yeah, a child comes out. Can't do anything for itself, but as the baby gets cleaned up, you see, it's got 5 fingers, both hands. Let's say all things being equal, it's got 10 toes, it's got a brain, it's got arms, right? Whatever, healthy child. Taken for granted, when things go wrong, right? But if you see the greatness, the human body, and without going into all these details about how a child's formed and how it's protected, and whatever the mother eats, it goes to the child, and like all these things, and then eventually, comes out. But certain things that the father puts into the child, and what the mother puts into the child, and you say, come on, that's nature, right? Did you ever take biology? I said, yeah, I was never good at biology, but did you ever take biology? That's normal. You're right, it's normal. But if you were to say every single time that's the way it works, let's say and how the child comes out and how it's formed and everything else, and how the organs form and what they're used for and this and that. How can you not believe in God? I mean, it's an absolute miracle. Yeah. But again, people say it's nature. That's what's supposed to be. So when things don't go the right way, and and then there are complications, that's when a person starts to question when things go the right way. Is a person thankful for all the miracles that go on? So doctors who see this on a regular basis, they see it on a regular basis, and they're still heretics. A lot of them are still heretics. They think, they think they run the world, they're in charge. They cause a lot of problems themselves. But the reality is, just on this topic, the reality is that the Torah says, the book of Exodus, when it's talking about healing, it uses double language. The end of the verse, it says, Rape Yerape, you will surely heal. Now, what does that mean? So a doctor is what's the word? Is works with man, so to speak, has the ability to heal only a flesh wound, only on the outside. Now, how do we know that? Because let's say you got the greatest surgeon, right? Surgeon does surgery. Whatever. He cuts open the person, whatever the surgery is, and he sews the person back up. Now, he sews the person back up. What's he going to say? He's going to say, okay, this should be the reaction. This is what should happen. I mean, let's say it's very simple. Person's relatively healthy. Whatever surgery they have, it's going to take this long. It's going to take this long to recuperate. This is what you're going to have to do. There are some, side effects, right? They're going to tell you the side effects. You might have a reaction to this, you might have a reaction to that. So they can't say for sure 100% what's going to be, because you can have exceptions. You can totally have exceptions. But they'll also say, once they stitch the person up, and let's say it's a dangerous surgery. It's life and death over here. Yeah. What will the doctors say? What should they say? They will probably say, again, I'm not a doctor, I'm playing one on TV, but they would probably say, we've done everything we can. Now you have to pray. We've done everything in our power. Yeah. Now, after they seal up the person, after they stitch them up, now they could say, well, we're going to keep this person isolated. We have to get an infection. If they get an infection, then there are other problems, whatever. right? So they can say according to what they see and according to what the books say and all that, this is what should happen. Now, again, it's going to depend on the person's health and the person's age, and a bunch of other things. Very good. Now, can they say 100%? Can they say 100% once they sew the person up, this is going to happen or that's going to happen? They can say, this is what should happen. According to nature, this is what should happen. There's no guarantee. They don't have any guarantee. Could there be an infection? Could get an infection. I have to open up again. Maybe this, right? So they may give you all the criteria what could happen, right? They give you all the scenarios. Now, best case scenario, you go according to the majority, this should happen. Very good. Let's say it does. Okay. Yeah, they're not prophets. They're calling it the way they see it. Okay. But do they have any guarantee whatsoever when they stitch up the person, how the person's going to heal? They don't have a guarantee. They can't say 100%. They can say it could go like this and go like that. Again, it's going to depend on a number of factors. So again, let's say they get it right. Very good. They could also get it very wrong. There could be things they didn't count for. Yeah. So that's why they have the ability to heal. God helps them heal others, but the internal healing comes from God himself. Because they can't do that. They can do open heart surgery, they can put in a stent, they can do other things, they can seal the person up. Okay. Yeah, and let's say it all works. Okay. Yeah, a friend of mine, they had to put in a stent, right? Do bypass surgery. And he died on the table. He's like literally dead on the table. They had to bring him back. So I asked him, I said, you have not bought experience? I said, tell me what it's like. He said, the only thing I saw was white. I saw the white wall. That was it. I go, that's it? Didn't see anything else? Nothing in that world? You got nothing to say? He's like, no, I don't have anything to say. But he was clinically dead. Now, did they tell him that could happen? I don't know if they told him. But that's what happened. The person's not, okay, the person's older, not, I wouldn't say they're in terrible health. I mean, okay, they needed a, bypass. Okay, I guess it's bad, right? But I don't think they expected them to die on the table. They wouldn't have done it otherwise, right? If they know someone is, very, very brittle and, the surgery could kill them, question is if they're going to do it or not. They're not this concerned. They think he's going to die on the table by any stretch. Yeah, I didn't even get a good story out of it. He just said I saw white. I saw the four walls. I'm like, it's terrible. They don't have anything to say that I'm still alive, still here. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, but there's no guarantee. They don't have a guarantee. They weren't expecting that. They got a surprise. That obviously, all these people come in, they bring them back to life. Very good. And, they brought them back. Otherwise, we died on the table. So again, if it was something that could have happened, something that was expected, they would have told them. They would have said, well, we have to do this. But we're just saying to protect ourselves, hopefully everything should be good. It can't guarantee, but you have to have it done. You have no choice. You have to have it done. Okay. Yeah, but again, what do they do? They can't say, they can never say this 100%, this is what's going to happen. Because they don't know how the body's going to react. The famous saying, say it here in Israel, say it other places, the surgery was successful, the patient died. Yeah, you can have, surgery can be successful, and something else kills the patient, or they die, whatever. I know someone, great rabbi, tripped on ice, had to have knee surgery. And after that, knee surgery was successful. And then something happened, I don't know, got some sort of infection, who knows what, and they died. Anyone expect anyone to die except in the movie Coma? Like when